coming down to access to data. That as you're, for example, going through that type of workshop or even tabletop exercise, the more data that you have, the more informed you're going to be as part of your materiality assessment. That, knowing, for example,
I'll jump on the question of double materiality, but let me frame it. And uh, I still wanted to say that I definitely like the name of your company. It definitely points to the objective of what we're doing with measurements and carbon footprint and greenhouse gases. And this is really to continue to sustain life on Earth,
yeah,
our lives and
exactly.
everybody else in the biosphere. So very good choice of name for the company. Going into the double materiality, first thing you indicated in the measurements, and this is maybe not so commonly known, but also financial measurements are similar. We don't measure every dollar and every cent, although if we tend to look at the balance sheets, we think they're down to a science, but there is a little bit of art there too. The second part of my question is with CSRD, you mentioned and double materiality. What is the role of software and what is the role of the supply chains? Because my understanding is we have to measure, or companies have to report on their supply chains, and that's a very different ball game than just telling them you have to deliver this, which is the typical relationship between supplier and customer, right? You have to deliver this by this date in this place and on this color, and this is it. And now you depend on their programs to reduce carbon footprint, greenhouse gases, and to report, and other factors that are related to sustainability. So give us a little bit of insight. I'm sure you are in the forefront.
Yeah, it's something that a lot of organizations that we're working with are prepping for CSRD reporting and performing these double materiality assessments. It's it's a real, in my opinion, I think a bit of a different approach from historic materiality assessments where you're now taking both the inside out approach, as you now need to also you're doing both the inside out and outside in approach or assessment of what is going to be material to your organization. And as part of that, the exercise it certainly broadens what could become a part of your strategy or could become a part of your program. I think the supply chain example is really great. In 2020, though, I think supply chains were certainly on top of or forefront of most organizations' minds, both on being a material topic and there being plenty of risks and opportunities there. And software really enables that process, or I think is a major part of that process, largely coming down to access to data. That as you're, for example, going through that type of workshop or even tabletop exercise, the more data that you have, the more informed you're going to be as part of your materiality assessment. That, knowing, for example, where various hotspots might be in your supply chain, where various hotspots might be in your own product line, things like that really help you identify and hone in on what is going to be material or what should our organization really focus on. Trying to find a better way to say it than care about, because I think there's a lot more than just what is material that organizations would care about. But what are going to be those key material topics that we need to focus on as part of this program, and as well as what are we going to have to report under the CSRD in this requirement?
And one maybe less discussed, or a couple of less discussed topics when we come to double materiality is the fact that all the companies, all the global companies, will have to report about their activities in Europe. It's not only the companies domiciled or primarily doing business in Europe. And on the other hand, the double materiality also implies auditing and much more rigorous and traceable recording. And I think software has something to do with that as well. Maybe you can give us a little bit more
Yeah,
about
certainly.
software and double material.
Yeah, I'll first touch on the auditing piece. I think that's going to be very key for organizations to think about and be prepared for. It requires a lot more rigor, and I think software is very well placed to support a lot of that. One of the things that is going to be key is kind of that end-to-end reporting, traceability, and auditability. So, for example, in our tool, and one of the things that we've really focused on is ease of auditability. So, we've created a platform and tool that will allow you to, for example, when you report out an emissions number, when you say this is our scope 3 number, you can trace back that individual number through all the calculations, through all the way back to the source. So, for example, take scope 2 market-based electricity, where the platform will then allow you to trace all of that back to the individual invoices. Where, an auditor, when they're going to come in and do their sampling, they're going to want to see the invoices and follow that through to the platform so that they can redo the calculation. They can say, yes, this number is correct and has been done correctly. And software, I think, is the perfect tool to enable that. Think about even financial auditing. And I was previously over at KPMG doing assurance engagements and things like that, where having to do the manual sampling, having to ask clients to go and get, large number of invoices is never a fun ask and never a fun question. That using tools like the ones that we have now through software, all that you have to do is provide your auditor with access to the tooling. They can go and do their sampling directly from the platform. That, it makes the engagement that much easier and much more transparent. Because rather than having, many different Excel files all being pulled together to pull the final number together with an online SaaS tool, it's all contained within that tool. You've got more controls on that, and that level of rigor also supports the auditing side, that they can trace those numbers back and usually have a lot more confidence that those numbers are going to be correct.
Great, but time is running really fast. I would like to turn to also to Isabella. I think we have questions about collaboration and the role of collaboration in the supply chain. As well as Isabella is actually a futurist, so I'm sure some of her questions will point at the future, not only at the current status. So, Isabella, back to you.
I think this talk is very sustainable, so I really enjoy listening. I will let Mitch continue on this topic. I don't have any specific notes at the moment.
So collaboration in the supply chain, I think it's the need for collaboration, right? Because we think information now, a lot of information has to flow from the suppliers to the customers, their end
Yeah,
users, their OEMs.
yeah. I think picking up on you said OEM, so I think the automotive example is a very good one to pick on. When I was working in industry a number of years ago, working for a tier one automotive supplier, certainly saw a lot of that each individual OEM or each individual company has their own set of requirements right now that and they're moving towards standardization. I'll touch on that in just a second, but that really meant that you're answering a different survey for every customer about your emissions, your policies, practices, things that you're doing, where it's used to inform their strategy and the suppliers that they're working with. But it really meant a lot of survey fatigue, that each one of these suppliers is getting, depending on the number of customers, potentially 20 different surveys that they have to respond to, or 20 different requirements from individual OEMs that really make it challenging to meet all of those in a meaningful way. And quite honestly, at that point, you're spending all your time answering the surveys and providing the data, and obviously gathering, collecting, and putting the data in place, rather than being able to focus on your own decarbonization activities. And the need for collaboration, the need for the ability for standardization across these OEMs in particular, but it even cascades down to other parts of the supply chain. You know, for example, as a tier one supplier, some of the requirements that you're going to have to share with the OEM or those that are your customers requires you to collect and gather data from your own suppliers, which, you know, means that you're sending out surveys to them. And the need for collaboration, it really will allow an industry to move the needle so much further, rather than, you know, again, spending that time and building up that survey fatigue, which I think is what we're seeing a lot of right now, and getting access to and requests for data that, you know, and I think there's a couple of really great examples in industry, in the private equity space. The ESG Data Convergence Initiative, I think, is a fantastic example of that, where they've standardized on a set of questions. I think it's 13 this year. That here are the 13 metrics that we are going to collect, and every portfolio company that is reporting to this is going to answer these same questions. That really allows, and I think private equity is a good example, just because of you know, the length of investment and how long, for example, that PE firm is going to be holding on to that portfolio company. That if it's, for example, 5 years, that if you're going to build a true decarbonization strategy, roadmap, and implement it's going to take longer than 5 years. You know, we're still in 2024. 2030 is really top of mind for other folks, for most folks, that by building up that collaboration and saying, here's what we're all going to focus on and look at in terms of those metrics and what we're going to be asking and requesting of people in the space, it basically allows someone to build and continue to work on that decarbonization strategy with those key metrics. Where, you know, going back to the OEM example, if you're having to respond to all these different surveys, you know, the more metrics you have or the more KPIs you're looking at, the less weighting or the less effort you can put into each one. That, you know, by standardizing on a small number and being able to really focus or hone in on those, and I think emissions are top of mind, certainly for this group, by focusing on those and allowing the sustainability experts within the organization to focus on and spend their time truly decarbonizing rather than responding to surveys, it really allows us to move the needle that much faster, and, you know, causes a lot less waste of resources on both sides of the coin.
So definitely, you know, move your resources from reporting to actually strategy and implementation seems to be the right trend, the right direction for supply or value chain reporting. And you describe also this negative multiplier effect, right? The first level, they have maybe 5 major customers, major OEMs. The next one has 5 times 5, so they end up with 25 reports and so on. So it's definitely a very good picture. But unfortunately, time is running fast, so I'll turn to Isabella. We definitely want you back to visit us soon, but I'll turn to Isabella for one last question.
Thank you, Manuel. Now I was just thinking it's funny how the sustainability process is turning into not that sustainable because it's a lot of that would be a good topic to discuss, ironically. Well, last but not least, we care about a lot of next generations, and we collaborate with a lot of young people who are interested in the sustainable future, and they're also very I would say, very conscious about the whole sustainability development, without much involvement and education. So what would you advise to them about how to pursue a career in such a industry, combining the software technology, and how to contribute the transition to a more sustainable world?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I would say in today's today's world, the access to resources, data, and yeah, just general knowledge in the space. It's all out there, and I'll share. I can share a link afterwards that I think has. I didn't create it. I found it on LinkedIn somewhere that the actual drive is called "So You Want to Work in Climate Tech," and it has hundreds of resources that folks can peruse and use to get educated and get brought up to speed. The other thing is this space is moving so fast in terms of requirements and things like that. And I've mentioned a couple already, but like SBTI, if someone was super familiar with the corporate standard and everything that was required of SBTI 2 years ago, uh, it's all changed. Even that SME pathway that I mentioned, at the end of the year, they changed. It used to be you could be a company that was 500 employees or less and get involved. Now it's 250 and less. There's also examples of like the flag methodology that came out. So I would say that if you want to work in the space, it's really an exercise of staying informed and getting up to speed on what are the current best practices and what organizations are doing, and really trying to stay ahead of the curve. I think having a background in, for example, environmental science, environmental engineering, or learning a lot of those core concepts will really help embed the reasoning and science behind a lot of what is going on in the space, while also coupling that, especially if you want to work in climate tech, having some sort of a data analysis or software background certainly will help with that as well. But yeah, just because the space is moving so fast, and even things like AI, machine learning, ChatGPT is making its way into the space as well. There are tools that we're working on playing with that are using some of that technology to, for example, help automate, streamline, and make those calculations that much faster, so that organizations again can truly focus on that decarbonization, can truly spend their time rather than working in Excel or working in other tools to collect and calculate the data, that they can start to really focus on the decarbonization efforts that is so key for, as the name of the company says, everyone on the planet, to really sustain life.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for all these useful and very practical tips and advice from your years of experience working in the industry. And thank you again for the whole conversation and all the insights. Thank you for our audience for tuning in today. Make sure you join us every week for a new episode of AKFI's Actionable ESG Talk series, where you can gain new perspective on how to mitigate risk and create value by integrating ESG and digital transformation. Until next week, goodbye for now. Bye, Manuel. Bye, Mitch.
Bye, Mitch.
Thanks so much
Bye,
for having me.
Isabella. Thank you.